Well, I appreciate you tuning in to the Zelos Podcast, the show that's all about the pros behind the pros in sports. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, I've got Javier Miller-Estrada with me. He's part of Ignite Performance. He and I were presenting at the Arizona State Clinic for the NSCA just last month. Man, I loved his presentation. I had to invite him on the show to talk a little bit more. Before we get underway, remember, my website, rockysnyder.com, is where you can go for podcast archives. Over 250 episodes now. 5 years in the making. If you want any kind of insight on the people that are behind the scenes in the NFL, NBA, NHL, and more, that's the place to go. Plus, online, in-person continuing education courses, blogs, and a whole bunch more. So just go to rockysnyder.com. Let's hear from our amazing sponsors, and then let's get this show on the road. This episode of the Zelos Podcast is sponsored by Kinetic IQ, where intelligence meets motion. Kinetic IQ brings a biomechanics lab into the palm of your hand, letting you measure movement anytime, anywhere, with just an iPad or an iPhone, and no wearables required. I've been using Kinetic IQ's markerless motion capture in my own practice, and whether you're screening athletes, analyzing posture and gait mechanics, optimizing performance, or guiding return to play, it helps practitioners like us save time, capture more objective data, and make instant actionable decisions. So to learn more about how Kinetic IQ is shaping the future of intelligent movement, visit them at kinetikiq.com. That's KINETIKIQ.com. You know, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have Metabolic Elite be one of the sponsors of the Zelos Podcast. You know what makes Metabolic Elite different is their commitment to real results. I've seen a lot of supplements and performance enhancement things over the years, but they pair clinical experience with innovation, like Lipitab, their proprietary solid-state liposomal delivery system. It's a chewable format which enhances absorption, like nutrients like BPC 157 and synapses. They're delivered more efficiently in the body, supporting recovery, focus, cognitive health. Their formulas go beyond the basics, solving performance health challenges at the system level. Every product is tested for quality, it's backed by research, it's trusted by athletes and clinicians alike. So learn more at metabolicelite.co. And you can get 10% off all of Metabolic Elite products by entering the coupon code ZELOS, ZELOS. And before we get underway, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, SNYDER. Click subscribe, give us some comments, tell a few friends, enjoy the show. Javier, I'm stoked to have you on, and I'll tell you why. Because last month when we were both presenters at the NSCA's Arizona State Clinic at Chandler Gilbert College there, your presentation just sparked my interest and really resonated with me. And then getting to know you a little bit over dinner the night before, and then that day, I'm just like, we got to have a conversation, and we got to hit the record button on that. So first of all, welcome to the Zealous Podcast.
Thanks, Rocky, man. It's fun to be here. I'm looking forward to this. Last week we had it scheduled, but a little insider baseball here. I was not feeling well, so I'm glad we're able to do it this week.
Well, sounds like you shook whatever it was that you had. So I'm glad to have you here. Now, give us a little bit of an understanding. What's your background, your career path? Tell us about your company and what you're doing.
Yeah, so I guess we'll start. I work with a lot of athletes. I'll start with my career as an athlete. It was interesting. I would say it wasn't particularly remarkable, but one of the things that kind of marked my athletic journey was being injured a lot, was having a lot of knee surgeries, just being in and out of the training room. So that kind of shaped how I view, performance in sports, and just how I want to help affect my athletes and work with the athlete kind of that I was at that time. So then I went to ASU. So I'm a local boy here in Arizona, in sunny Arizona. And then I started Ignite Performance, which is my main job. I can talk a little about the other role I have. But I started that in 2018 with a business partner named Rob Gambardella. So I think you might have met Rob before.
I
But
did.
Oh, yep. Lovely, lovely gentleman here. But we've been open since 2018. We're in Chandler, Arizona, so not too far from where we met and presented it together at the conference. And we work with primarily high school athletes. We also work with some college athletes, a handful of professional athletes, and also during the summers we work with the younger athletes, like the we call them the little turds affectionately. It's a term of endearment, but we work with the younger kids. Totally different programs, obviously. And our main goal is to provide opportunity for athletes, whether it be for if they're going to, have a contract year, let's say at the highest level, or whether they just want to play and enjoy sports, like give them the opportunity to enjoy movement and enjoy sports. We want to provide them with that opportunity. So that's the majority of what I do. I would say the other main thing, and we talked about this earlier, is I do have a podcast called the Adaptable Athlete Podcast, and I work with a company called Emergence, which has shaped a lot of what we're probably going to talk about today. We are a movement skill education company. We do conferences, certifications, and just online education for people who want to learn more about, these modern approaches to skill acquisition and movement training.
Right on. Well, you got your hands full then. That's
Yeah.
quite nice. And so, with your athletes, what are the primary sports? What are the ones that you will focus on more than others?
Yeah, we work with a lot of different sports, but I would say the main ones are going to be baseball, girls volleyball, and also football are going to be the primary sports. But I mean, we'll see lacrosse. Like I worked with the lacrosse team last night on the field doing their speed and agility work, and I also, we have basketball. But I would say those first three are the main ones that I mentioned.
Fantastic. Okay, then let's just talk a little bit about your presentation and
Yeah.
title and just give us a synopsis that we can start with.
Yeah, so I presented on a topic that I'm very passionate about, just basically reframing how we view speed and agility. It's basically breaking away from tradition. We talked a little bit earlier about how people tend to do things that they've always done, whether it be strength and conditioning, whether it's speed and agility, whether it be coaching, and just maybe more questioning, is this what makes sense for my athlete? Is this going to lead to a more game ready athlete, or am I just going through the motions? Am I just rehearsing a pattern, or am I trying to make my athlete more resilient, more adaptable, more robust? So I presented on some of these ideas, which are becoming more and more popular. You're seeing, like there was a recent article with a friend of mine named Alex Harama. They talked about the constraints-led approach. So this is kind of under the umbrella of what I was mentioning. I didn't go too deep into that part, but using these ideas of training that resembles a little bit more of sport. And can that make our athletes more resilient, more adaptable, and ultimately better at their sport? So that was basically the groundwork of what I presented on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it because, well, how about this? The pitfalls of a strength conditioning coach. What would you say are the biggest pitfalls when it comes to this topic?
Yeah, what I noticed around presenting this year especially, I did more of these types of things and conversations with coaches. I've had a lot, and I feel like coaches, the biggest thing that I could say if someone gets from this podcast or a presentation of mine is just to be curious, because I feel like we tend to just do what's always been done. And if you ask a coach, like, what is your reasoning? What is the theoretical background for why you do what you do? Unfortunately, it's oftentimes, well, that's what we've always done, or that's what's worked in the past. And I think it's important to continually audit or at least ask what you're doing and why you do it. And you hopefully come to two conclusions. You either are more firm in your beliefs or you change or open your mind a little bit. So for me, that's like the biggest thing, that coaches can get out of really any discussion, any presentation, ideally.
Yeah. And so what I'm interpreting that to mean is that it is an easy path to just keep on following along with what you learned as an athlete yourself, became a coach, or what coaches put to you. It's just a passing of information from one generation to the next with maybe some adaptations, but most of the time it's the same information. We could look back decades after decades and find that
Hmm.
these programs are relatively the same. But then you've got that other side where somebody stops and asks, hey, why is it that we're doing this? Is there a better way? Is it really something that the person needs? Is it just because I'm trying to fill up the time in the training period and I don't know what else to put in there? And this is what they're doing. So I guess I'll throw that in there too. So it's almost like the ones that ask why are willing to go a little extra mile and to create a little bit more effort and put more on their plate, and the ones that just continue with the programs that have been passed on, just it's like the old PE teacher who has tenure. Why rock the boat? This seems to be working, I'll just keep it going. I find myself in the former rather than the latter. So that's kind of what intrigued me in many ways about your talk, is because you have no compunction to shake the tree and find out what falls, if you will. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think I like what you said there about, there's this path dependency where people get on a path and they just flow within upstream and they just keep going, or downstream, maybe whatever stream side of the stream it is. But basically they just go through what's always been done. And what I think coaches, I think everybody is like this, but especially coaches, we like to be comfortable, and sometimes get leaning into that discomfort, you can unearth some truths that maybe you don't like. And I feel like, just as an industry, in order to progress forward, I think it's important that we do that. I mean, imagine going to your doctor, and if the doctor just came out and they said, I've been doing the same thing for 40 years, like you would probably be like, well, you haven't changed anything. And so I find that a lot of people do that, and a lot of industries do that, and in sports especially. And so for me, it's just like, hey, let's get some new ideas in here and see if you can at least utilize some of these ideas to maybe help your athletes. Because at the end of the day, like, that's what matters, right? It's serving our athletes to the best capacity that we have.
Give us some examples of how you have walked away from traditional approaches. What are some of the philosophies or modalities that you've now adopted or created on your own?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'll take you back a little bit over a decade. So I was working in a gym in Chandler, Arizona, and I was doing what everybody else typically does. So I would take my athletes, the first 15, 10 minutes would be, I'm, using air quotes for listener, speed and agility. And that typically looks like, we would go through our agility ladders, we would go through whatever sort of technical model you would want to do. And then in walks this guy, and I was pretty young into my career, so I didn't really know. I honestly didn't have an answer for why I did anything. I just did it, right? That's what I knew. In walks this guy. His name is Sean Mishka, and he was, one of my first mentors. And he works with a lot of NFL athletes. And I'll bring him into the story a little bit. So Sean had tremendous success with his career. Worked with a lot of the Minnesota Vikings, with many Pro Bowlers. But then at some point, he sees that like his athletes aren't adapting on the field the way he wants to, and so he deeply investigates, and he starts utilizing more contemporary ideas that have been discussed more in the psychological field. And so anyway, we connect, and we grow together, and I start kind of doing my thing, and taking and borrowing bits and pieces. But essentially, the way I view movement, the lens that I view movement and just human interaction and movement in general, is through something called ecological dynamics, which is basically that people learn differently than what we are traditionally used to. We have kind of a technical model approach where people store a motor program. People, just repeat the perfected movement. In the ecological dynamics, which is a combination of complex systems and ecological psychology, and it takes into account the environment that people learn and are a product. The movements are a product of their environment and their individual constraints, to kind of just over top down view. Basically, each situation is different, each person moves differently, and so you adapt according to who you are. So it takes into account the individual, the situation, and the task that they're doing. And so that shapes how I view movement, and I kind of use the umbrella modern approaches, just because I think it's a little bit more approachable. But that's basically what shapes how I view performance.
Okay, so you've got a team. Well, your lacrosse athletes last night. You got them
Mhm.
out on the pitch, and you've got them doing speed, agility, quickness.
Mhm.
Positionally, there's several players that are quite different from one another. Obviously, the goalkeeper being the most different from everybody else. But the positions themselves have specific demands. There's going to be a greater degree of maximal sprint deceleration for some of them, others not so much, and so on. So I'm imagining you take this all into consideration, but as the individual athlete themselves, they have particular movement patterns that they rely on and constraints based
Mhm.
on their history of injuries, experiences, and a whole bunch of other things I can't even begin to mention. But how do you compile a program that tries to be beneficial to all and not make it a one size fit all program?
Yeah, that's a great question. You touched on very important things: injury history, position. One of the things that coaches, like more of a general one with lacrosse, think about the mechanics of sprinting on air versus with nothing, no implement, versus the mechanics of sprinting with a stick. It's very different. And then some of them have longer sticks. So, thinking about the sport, starting out, what is a sport? What is required of my sport? So, like an example that I see, and we can get back to lacrosse, is people taking track and field and models and applying them to sports that are more dynamic, that have not necessarily just linear sprinting, that are evasion, invasion sports, and then using that as of judging speed. And we make this mistake all the time with like
All the time.
all the time with like combines and judging how fast someone sprints in 40 yards in their underwear unopposed on their own start, right, with no visual stimulus or cue. And so we judge that person is fast, and unfortunately, it's led to a lot of misevaluations and just people not getting opportunities. Maybe like everybody knows Jerry Rice. That's probably listening to that, right? He was one that didn't run quote unquote fast, and then another one that I used in my presentation is John Ross, around I believe 4.22 or 4.24. He didn't last very long, and obviously there's other factors, not just speed. But I guess that would be the first thing, is thinking about what is demanded of their sport. And then you can go into positionally like, okay, how important is max velocity? And we do that. We do a good amount of max velocity sprinting, but most sports are doing short area sprinting, change of direction sprinting, and don't necessarily get in the open field a lot. So thinking about that, and then obviously thinking about the athlete as an individual. How is a 6'5" athlete? I'm not very tall. We're both not very tall. I think that's no secret to everybody. We're not going to look the same. We're not going to look the same as that 6'5" athlete. I have bad knees. And so looking at like maybe my quote unquote model, my the way I move is going to look different than that other person. And so factoring that in is like the very first thing. The sport, the individual, what are their positional demands? Obviously, in a larger setting, it's going to be more challenging. So in this particular setting, it's me and 25 to 30 kids. So it's going to be more about their sport and more about how they move and maybe how they might solve a problem, less about the technical side of it, because that's not necessarily my role. That's where the sport coach has a huge role, because I haven't played the cross. I've learned enough to know enough, but probably, could even expand my knowledge more. But that's what it looks like for me, starting about the sport, the demands, the athlete, and knowing a little bit about the positions, like you said earlier.
See, this is the stuff I wanted to talk to you about. This is the nitty gritty that has plagued me for so long. And you hit it in regards to track and field and the carryover. We're doing all this linear acceleration and okay, maybe there's curvilinear when they hit the corners on the track. But for the most part, everyone's interested in the 40 or whatever. And they're all about just explosiveness in one direction. And I carry that over into the weight room. I think it's the
Mhm.
damn same thing. Like, why are we so concerned with linear force production with strength training? Whether it's the deadlift, the squat, the bench press, powerlifting. Of course, we're going to borrow from powerlifting because that's a longer history. But what about multi-directional resistance training? We're getting into it now. Omnidirectional training, like Michelle Dalcour and Viper, and all those things are there. But but at the same time, they're looking at it like it's an accoutrement, it's a side dish. When I think it should be the freaking main dish, because if we're talking specificity, then how is linear force production going to really help a basketball player who's getting around a defender, who's a soccer player who's juking somebody on the field. Like it is multi-directional acceleration, deceleration. I know I'm preaching to the choir here,
Mhm.
but this is the stuff that has plagued me for so long. And every time I have a conversation with somebody, and it's not like I get blank stares, but I guess I'm not just getting the idea or information across in a way that they can truly absorb it, because I see that there's something inherently missing. I won't say it's wrong, but I think that we're so incomplete with the where we've come from. And if you look at strength training programs, it hasn't changed a damn bit. We're just now starting to talk about unilateral strength training. We're going into the split squats and the step ups, and some people are saying I don't do back squats anymore, and I really want to get into anyway. You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, no, I mean 100%. And that's where it's like it's very obvious when you zoom out to me and to you, it's very obvious, but we get caught in the trap of just saying like okay, I increase. So if I take a high level, let's just say an NFL player, do we really think that his 3 rep back squat is going to make a lick of difference at that level? These guys are Ferraris.
No.
You know what I mean? These guys are already strong, and so power output is almost never the problem. Force output, maybe deceleration work, multi-directional work, changing it up, adding variety, adding variability, working on some of those movements where he might be in a compromised position. Or just, I mean, if you do what you talked about, adding in some multi-directional work, you're already better than the majority of strength coaches because we want to get those numbers up. And it's just not that important. It's now, I will say this, like going to the track and field thing, of course there's certain things that because people are going to listen to this. Of course there's certain things like do we want certain acceleration KPIs? Sure. Yes.
Sure.
But the problem is like taking a track, like I've had literally people send me stuff for an athlete and they send me a video of Usain Bolt comparing the two. I'm like, this is a
Yeah. No.
12-year-old soccer athlete. This is a 6 foot. These are not the same. These are literally not even apples and oranges, apples and potatoes. It's not even this close to the same thing. So why are we making this comparison?
Yeah, I could see there is a solid argument that I agree with when somebody comes up and says, track and field is the bedrock of human movement, and traditional strength training is the bedrock of resistance training. I'm like, yeah, sure. We've got to start at some basic elemental movement patterns. And I think track and field, it can do that when we're talking about speed development. I think it's fantastic form running, A skips, anything you've got on the track, I think it's going to be great. And then when it comes to the weight room, you want to do your power lift moves and teach the younger ones how to properly execute movement with good stability, range of motion, control, and so on, and intensity. That's great. But once that has been developed, you don't stay there. You don't stay in kindergarten, as far as I'm concerned. You need to accelerate and advance. And that's where, actually mimicking a human movement, what it looks like. And as far as I know, when you're running on a basketball court, both legs don't travel in the same direction at the same time, unless you're holding on to the rim and swinging under a dunk. But right, so I'll give you an anecdotal story. I have this high school girls basketball team that I have put programs together with for the last 2 seasons, and their injury rate has dropped significantly and their success rate has just skyrocketed. Now, granted, there's many other elements. I'm not saying that this is the underlying root cause, but they've got a great coach, they've got talented players, and with their conditioning program, we're focusing on highly on mobility because high school athletes greatly lack mobility due to their growth rate typically. And then we're also focusing on controlling single leg strength and coordination. And we're doing rotational movement in a controlled manner. And it just carries over so much better into the sport than if we're going to be doing front squat, hex bar, deadlift, all the same things that you could pull out of, unfortunately, most NSCA strength conditioning journals. Any article that shows what their training program is, and unfortunately, is not going to show it that way very often.
Yeah, I mean, The thing is, again, we like to have, I think, as a field where we like to have a measurable, like I increase their squat, and it just when you zoom out, it's largely irrelevant. And going back to even if you take a scenario like we'll say lacrosse or football, we'll just say football. And if you were to have the similar mechanics as far as head down, like you would track and field, running in football, you're probably going to get earholed and end up on your butt. And so there's a perceptual element that athletes have that they need to be able to attune and perceive certain things. And so that's where coaches we try to at the same time we push athletes, we try to treat them with kid gloves and we try to simplify the complexity of sport and the complexity of lifting, right? Not adding rotational elements, as you said, just having linear because it's easy, right? It's fairly straightforward, but our athletes will get exposed to it. They will experience it. And so to me, we have two choices. We can either hide them from it and pretend it doesn't exist, or we
Yep.
can bring elements of that into training and have a more, anti-fragile, to use the word, right? We want an athlete that is able to adapt to stress and get better, not just one that crumbles. And so I think to me, that's like a hugely important thing that our industry misses the boat on.
We're just going to take a quick pause from this conversation to acknowledge our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. The Zelos Podcast is sponsored by Kinetic IQ, where intelligence meets motion. Kinetic IQ brings a biomechanics lab into the palm of your hand, letting you measure movement anytime, anywhere with just an iPad or iPhone. No wearables required. I've been using Kinetic IQ in my own practice, and whether you're screening athletes, optimizing performance, or guiding return to play, it helps practitioners like us save time, capture more objective data, and make instant actionable decisions. So to learn more about how Kinetic IQ is shaping the future of intelligent movement, visit kinetikiq.com. That's KINETIKIQ.com. At the forefront of metabolic elite is Jim Lavelle, internationally recognized clinical pharmacist, the chief science officer at Lifetime, and the co-chair for the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. He's got over 4 decades of experience and has guided Olympic athletes, professional teams, and leading health institutions. You know what makes Metabolic Elite different is their commitment to real results. Like Lipitab, their proprietary solid-state liposomal delivery system. It's a chewable format which enhances absorption like nutrients like BPC 157 and synapses. They're delivered more efficiently in the body, supporting recovery, focus, cognitive health. Their formulas go beyond the basics, solving performance health challenges at the system level. Every product is tested for quality, it's backed by research, it's trusted by athletes and clinicians alike. And you can get 10% off all of Metabolic Elite products by entering the coupon code ZELOS, ZELOS. Resiliency.
Hmm.
So, how do you build resiliency? I'm curious about that.
With my athletes?
Yeah, exactly. Within the programs that you
Yes.
design.
So we try from the warm up into our whole session. That's one of the things that we try to emphasize. So, for example, one thing that we do, I feel like the warm up is low hanging fruit for coaches. So, the warm up, if you think about the warm up, it's 10 minutes. Let's just say you work with your athletes 3 times a week, you work with them for several months. I'm not going to do math on this podcast and embarrass myself, but that is hours of time that the athletes have simply just gone through the motions, right? And so, the warm up is a great place for coaches to start to utilize certain concepts. And so one of the concepts that we like to utilize is we call it ownership. And basically, instead of me having the athlete move in a way that they've done a million times, I'm going to give them some ownership, some stake in the process. And so we call this ownership squats. That would be some of the first things we do. And so it could be simple as them going down 10, 15 yards and squatting in multiple planes of motion, lunging in multiple planes of motion. I might add a constraint and say, I want you to add a reach because if we think about like sport like basketball, we're not just going to be here with our arms and torso facing the same way. If you look at like Klay Thompson's injury, he landed and his arms were reaching across his body. One of his, I think that was his ACL. Like I might add that or something like that. That also touches on a concept that we like to utilize called repetition without repetition. And so instead of repeating the same thing over and over again, it's let me repeat variations of the same thing in many different ways as possible. And so going back a little bit, we're obsessed with this idea of quantity. How much can I do? But for me, quantity is how many different ways can I do it? Right? That's huge.
Excellent.
Yeah, right. And so we'll start there. And it's funny, Rocky, because I'll see athletes that come in post surgery, whether it be an ACL, whether it be something, and they're so guarded, they're so internalized with language that's often done by physical therapists. And they'll do this ownership squat. And if you can imagine someone squatting and looking down at their feet and looking down at their toes and looking down at where their knee is, and at some point, we've got to get away from that. And so for us, it's like, hey, no, like look up, maybe like do it with another person. And so they'll do that. And from there on out, we do a bunch of different things. But for me, it starts in the warm up and getting them away from this internalized cueing that we've done, that we do, look at your knees. And then from there, we can kind of expand and do a bunch of different stuff to help them become more resilient.
Oh, that's so good because you're saying like from a sky view, stepping back and looking at the whole thing, and I think we need to do that more often because look, everything you put on the body in terms of training conditioning is stress. We're stressing the system, and if we're going to stress the same pattern over and over, repetitively, then honestly, by definition, it's repetitive stress, which could easily create or manifest into some kind of syndrome, shall we say.
Mhm.
Essentially, the more a person does a strict path or pattern of motion, they are reinforcing only one thing. But Gary Gray and the Gray Institute with the lunge matrix, reach matrix, you've got to be in there. I know, but just how you were talking right there is it's exploring three dimensionality and it's giving the nervous system this beautiful, beautiful awakening. And it's encouraging joints to load in a myriad of positions and angulations. It's allowing the soft tissue to experience load also in three-dimensional space. I mean, it doesn't really get more specific than that. So essentially, for my warm up, it's going to start off with circular joint action because a circle has an infinite number of vectors. You can break it down to 360 degrees, but break it in between the degrees and in between that and in between that. And you've got an infinite number of force vectors going on. That means that that joint is going to experience so much in the surrounding tissue and the mechanoreceptors and everything else. And we go joint by joint, just do some simple circular action. And then we get into those loading patterns, like you say,
Mhm.
squatting with the 27 different foot positions, narrow, neutral, and wide, 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, internally rotated, externally rotate, and any combination, it comes out to 27. Can we put them in these positions? And wouldn't you know it, I could freeze frame any moment in time in a football game or in a basketball game to show you that that's a position they have to be in. That's one of the 27 foot positions that you'll find. So, oh man, I'm loving your conversation right now because it's so nice to talk to somebody who thinks the same way and not to reinforce or to build the ego up in any way, but just as comfort that you're not alone in this drifting on this sea that everyone else seems to feel like everything's okay. But I'm pleased to know that you're thinking outside of the strict parameters and what are the results? So let's talk about that for a second. What's the outcome for you as you see it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we've been lucky enough to help a lot of athletes over 125 at this point, like go to college and get college scholarships. So for us, it's not just about like, there's another thing, like this is less, maybe a little bit more esoteric, if you will, but there's something about embedding an athlete and having them have fun with training, having them own part of the process. We do something called we have an exploration part of our warm up where they will do like some of the PVC pipe evasions in addition to having them move in a variety of ways. Or they'll do something with a partner, maybe even some like we do some mirroring, but it's fun. And so we love that our athletes, obviously we want them to go to college if that's what they want to do, but I want them to stick around. Because with what happens is a lot of times people bust their butt, especially in sports like softball, volleyball, baseball's trending this way with year-round sports, and then they burn out. And I feel
Yeah.
like as coaches, like we gatekeep fun. You know what I mean? It's like fun and hard work are incongruent. I think they're very congruent. I think you can work hard and have fun. And I think training this way also allows your athletes to enjoy the process. So for us, obviously, we have that. We have a big wall of fame in our wall with some of the athletes on the college side, some of the athletes on the pro side, and a lot of them. It's fun when some of them are on there and then they come back and say, "Hey, actually, can I do an internship with you?" Or, we have one of our coaches on the wall who now works with us. We have two athletes that I've trained personally that now train at our facility. So that's also very cool. From an injury standpoint, we have a great injury rate. You mentioned that. That's one of the biggest thing that I know is that our athletes typically stay healthy. Obviously, you can't have a perfect record. There's always going to be athletes that get hurt, but it's very low. And then I would say the other thing, going back, you mentioned about, having this idea of variability. There's like this variability overuse hypothesis where people just, like you said, when you train the same way, you can't disperse forces in more novel ways and more variable ways. And it teaches the body to be able to have more ways to solve problems instead of just the one repetitive pattern. And on top of that, with the way I mentioned this earlier, with the way youth sports is trending, like athletes, if you're working with athletes, so even if you work at college, that athlete in America anyway, has likely done the same sport for several years. And then they train the same way for several years. So they get to you, man, like you're dealing with a different problem than when you and I played sports. And so
Yeah.
just exposing them to more novelty, to more variations of what they're doing, I think is hugely important. So for me, obviously the college scholarships is important, but I want athletes to love movement. I want them to not burn out. I want them to enjoy like training. And then I would say last is like just fun, like fun and stay healthy. If we can do those things, then we've done our job.
I agree. I love that you continue to incorporate game and competition within your training protocol because I recall being a soccer coach in the earlier years, it was all about sharks and minnows and playing tag and all, and then you would give them touches on the ball and you start to incorporate a little bit of just tactics, drills, and skills. And and somewhere as the athletes progress year after year, and of course we've got beach soccer in the summertime and indoor soccer in the wintertime, and then there's travel teams and all that. And the kids are playing all year round. The burnout rate's going to be very high because that's all they're doing, unfortunately, these days, like you say. But as the player ages up into the teenage years in high school, the games and the play are are kind of just pulled away because we're adulting them, we're
Mhm.
maturing them, and with maturity comes a seriousness. And I think that's such a disservice to the athletes. I think they still need that little kid inside them playing and making it fun and not being so dang serious on how you're going to execute this specific drill and in this game setting, this situational aspect here. Those have a place, but we can't forget, like you say, we can't forget about making it fun.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And obviously, as athletes get advanced, we do need to think about, well, like you mentioned, tactics and intentions when we're designing movement. But you can still take um, a game-like approach, just being intentional with what you would like, maybe the outcome or the intention to be. But like for example, with our lacrosse athletes yesterday, so lacrosse is a sport where communication, teamwork, cutting, setting screens, different. Obviously, there's a one-on-one aspect, but there's a collective aspect where athletes have a level of creativity, and so we did this particular game, activity, whatever you want to call it, where it was a bucket ball. So where there's two trash cans, right? And then, well, one trash can, and then we just had a lot of kids, so we had another group going, several feet down that way. And essentially, you have a certain amount of time and you're trying to get the ball in the bucket. And so, is it exactly lacrosse? Not necessarily, but there's a lot of similarities. You'd see some of the things that they would do that was unique and novel. And that's what when we have this overly constrained environment, we strip athletes of the creativity there, and we can practice something. We can practice a move, but athletes need to know when to utilize it. So you can give them the tools, but they need to know when to utilize said tool. And so you would see them, I'm not telling them, I may nudge them towards certain solutions, but they might do picks or they might run give and goes. And it's really cool to see. So that's an example of like a game that they really enjoyed, but it still teaches elements of lacrosse. So like defending in space. So you see certain kids struggle with that. You might see certain kids struggle with passing in a way that actually is effective. So these elements kind of help teach elements of lacrosse, or these games, if you will.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, how about this? In terms of sports, is there
Mhm.
one sport that you desire to begin really working with athletes that you don't currently work with?
That's a good question. I don't think I've been asked that before. Hmm. I've worked with, I started working with more volleyball than anything else. Um, right now, I that's a good question. I would say maybe a little bit more basketball. We work with a decent amount of basketball athletes, but for me, that was my favorite sport growing up, and I feel like basketball has an epidemic of we're in the get work Mamba mentality era. And Kobe Bryant, rest in peace, had a lot of great things to teach athletes. But now every athlete thinks that they need to be Kobe Bryant and train twice a day and then lift twice a day and then go for a run at the same time. And so with basketball, I find that it is like the overtraining is very, very high. So just to be able to just help and say, hey, you know what? Maybe you got shots up. Maybe you got left. Go home, eat or rest. So just to be able to impact that a little bit more because I find that basketball is like on my mind as far as the amount of overtraining that they do. So maybe that, but we do have a few basketball players, a decent amount anyway. But that's one that I feel like could benefit quite a bit.
And are there any sports that you kind of shy away from, sports or competitions?
Not really. I mean, I've worked with swimmers, but I would say that's maybe golf and swimming just because that's not as much in my wheelhouse. I can do it, but it's not as much in my wheelhouse. But I would say that would be a couple sports. But I've worked with them before. I'm pretty open. I know that sounds maybe a little bit maybe a cop out, but I'm for me, I also like the challenge of learning about a sport. One of my first high level athletes was a USA fencer. And so I don't know anything about fencing. And so
What did you learn? What did you
what did I
learn?
learn? Yeah, so I watched his film. He sent me clips of high level fencers. There's a guy named Daryl Homer who was the highest level fencer there from America. And then I also went out and fenced, which I don't know if everybody would do that, but I went out and fenced. And so what I learned is that the patterns that they do are so different. They're very upright. So, when we think, for me as like as playing basketball, baseball, football, every other sport, I think of like sitting kind of back a little bit more, if that makes sense. Like sitting my hips back. Fencing is very upright. And so instead of having feet, like if I'm, imagine me facing this way, both my feet are like shuffling this way. They completely rotate one foot out here while turning you. So their torso is here, left foot is facing this way, right foot would be facing you. And so it's a really unique pattern. There's a lot of asymmetries there because no one's fencing with their right and their left hand. So I would say, that is a challenge, but I think that's one thing I guess as a take home, coaches can learn different sports, in my opinion.
Excellent. Okay, so when it comes to Obscure Sports Quarterly,
Mhm.
OSQ, I don't know if you remember the movie Dodgeball, but there you go.
Yes.
Are there other obscure sports that you'd be like, Man, that must be a fun one to train, like Olympic curlers or biathlons that they're cross country skiers and they have to shoot something. I mean, are there any, like we've got the Winter Olympics coming up in just a few months here. Any of those Olympic sports that kind of enthrall you to say, oh man, I wouldn't mind doing a little bit with those athletes?
You know what's the coolest sport to me that no one talks about is handball. Like high level handball where and I mean the handball where there's a goal,
And
I think there's
Annette.
a version and a net.
Yeah.
Those guys like what you'll see. I mean, I can send you some YouTube clips that I've seen. So like you'll see them go in the air, and what's cool about this is they'll literally be online watching that goalie, and they'll go in and they'll wait till that goalie presents one side versus the other, and then they'll still hang in the air and throw. I mean, it's some super athletic, and these guys are like taller. European teams tend to be better at that. And so I would say that would be really cool. Like handball would be
Yeah.
pretty sick. Yeah.
Yeah. Like baseball and hockey combined almost
Like,
without the ice.
yeah,
Yeah.
baseball, hockey, a little bit of basketball, a little bit of
Uh-huh.
like it seems super cool to me.
Ew, that's excellent. Okay, so give us the rundown of your podcast and your company. Throw out some social media handles, but before you do that, there is a gunny sack. There's like a burlap sack hanging behind you on the wall, I think.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Yeah, so that is I'm a big coffee drinker and a big traveler. So I love to travel. That I got in Puerto Rico touring a coffee farm. So that was, audience can kind of see that a little bit. That I got maybe in, I guess, 2021. I went to Puerto Rico and then we went to the interior. Most people stay in San Juan. They go to Fajardo. That's where the beaches are. That's where like the eco tours are. And those are both cool. But we went into the interior and then went on a coffee farm tour, and so that's there. And I asked them
Wow.
like, "Hey, can I have that?" And they're like, "Yeah." So
Okay, so it didn't start off full and you emptied it by your
no,
coffee usage.
I don't drink that much coffee, but I do drink a lot of coffee. I think as most trainers, I think everybody probably knows this, but trainers know more about and coaches know more about caffeine than any other people outside of
Oh
maybe,
yeah, I'm an
you know.
expert in that on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Okay, so give us the rundown of your podcast and your business and social handles.
Yeah, so we'll start with Ignite. That you can find on just search Ignite Performance. You should be able to find us. But we're in Chandler, Arizona. We do a good amount on social media. So if anybody's interested in learning more about that, you can find us there. And then for my personal social handle is at the Coach Hav. So you can find that on X, on Instagram. I'm more active there. LinkedIn, you can find me. Currently, I've been working on a planner for coaches who are interested in these ideas. We just had our first run, which sold out for pre-orders. It's called the Modern Coaches Planner. You can probably find that if you search that as well. And so the idea behind that, it's for coaches who are interested in these ideas, but they're not sure where to start. It's a great way to make sure that your training is alive, it's representative, it's efficacious. There's 15 QR codes where I kind of give guided lessons. Some of them are linked to the podcast. So that's one thing if anybody's interested, or if you just want to go in and be part of the email list, and there's a free resource there, a coach's checklist that I have. And then the podcast is the Adaptable Athlete Podcast. You can find it at any podcast player. We have a lot of conversations just like this one that are about skill development. Whether it's, people that are that work in professional baseball, people that work in basketball, people that are researchers. So that's another thing. And I think it's that like people don't read as much research that I think is really important too, because I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. It can be dense. But like read that because then you can kind of hear it from that side and maybe some makes sense, maybe some doesn't. We'll have people in sports psychology, people that work with equestrian, like all kinds of people there. People that work in climbing, we talked about climbing. So yeah, so that's the podcast, and you can find it any podcast player. And then last, sorry, I'm kind of saying everything. Last is Emergence. So Emergence is the company that I mentioned. Sean Mishka is the co-founder of Emergence, along another gentleman named Tyler Yerby. And then like like I said, they've been important in my career. So if you want to learn more about certification, stuff like that, you can check out Emergence at Emergent Movement, MVMT. The Emergent Movement was taken. So MVMT.com. So emergentmovement.com.
Right on. Well, Javier, this has been a great time. I mean, I love talking shop with people like yourself and always come away learning something new. So this is no exception. I appreciate your time, man. Thanks for being here.
I really appreciate you having me. I really enjoyed our talk.
Well, put that one in the bank. Man, that was a good will deposit right there. Can't thank Javier for coming on and just incredible information, incredible insight. I love it when people ask why. Until next week, we're going to hear from our sponsors one more time. Just go out there and do some good in the world. Remember to check out metabolicelite.co. Check out all the products they have on their website. Synapsin Pro is something I've been using to help stay focused without having to over-caffeinate myself. It keeps me in the zone so I can just really hone in on the things I need to achieve without feeling like, man, I gotta reach for an energy drink every 5 minutes. Metabolicelite.co. And don't forget, Kinetic IQ. They've got markerless motion capture for morons like me. I can use their product with my iPhone or my iPad. I can look at posture analysis, movement analysis of any exercise, gait analysis. It gives me everything I could possibly want when tracking people's movements. So, check out kineticiq.com.